we would do these 2-week pop-ups. I was such a piker, such a scrappy, entrepreneur where I didn't want to spend a lot of money and tie it up into leases and so forth. And so what we would actually do is we'd go to landlords and ask for rev shares. Your space is empty. Let us come in for 2 to 3 weeks. We'll drive buzz, we'll drive traffic, and we'll help you get that full-time tenant. But after 2 weeks, it was like, we'd hear that song, Closing Time. We were so sad to leave. We had just made all of these friends in this town, and the ROI was there. And we would see 175% increase in transactions within customers online in the city of Dallas and 80% in the state of Texas. We'd say the same triple-digit growth in Nashville and double-digit growth in the state of Tennessee. There's 3 main goals of the Lively Experience store. The first thing is it's essentially taking the old school mentality of what retail is, word of mouth. So the first objective of the Lively Experience store is essentially a clubhouse, a place for them to come and be together and activate what is important to them. The second major objective, of course, is to sell product and to help them find that perfect fit. Because sometimes buying online, you just don't get it right the first time. And then the third main objective is data. We want to understand what's next. So we usually have some type of experience where they can vote on our product. Anything that comes into the Lively development pipeline usually comes from a customer saying, oh, what about this? And so it's really like an incubation lab.
Well, welcome, Michelle. We're thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you.
And so I'm really excited to delve into Lively, which is the DTC digital-first women's apparel brand that you founded. But before we do that, I'd like to take a step back and ask you about your experience before Lively. I know that you worked as a director and senior merchandiser at Victoria's Secret. So could you take us along that path to founding Lively?
Sure. First of all, good morning, everyone. It's so lovely to be here. And I'm loving this retro movie theater scene, by the way. My path is a little unconventional for a typical entrepreneur. I actually grew up in retail, I like to say. I started working for Federated right out of school. I started building private label brands for them in the space of lingerie for Macy's and Bloomingdale's. Followed some amazing bosses and mentors to VF Corporation and launched brands like Nautica and Kipling, and then found my way to Victoria's Secret really purposefully in that I wanted to get closer to the customer. I wasn't feeling that connection from concept to customer in those other channels. And I had the wonderful opportunity to be in direct for Victoria's Secret, which at the time was actually a catalog is what right. Direct meant. Exactly. But what I realized when I was there is that this amazing brand, so cohesive, so disciplined in what it meant and stood for. Anywhere you go in the world, 100 different languages, you see Victoria's Secret, you hear Angel Fantasy Push-Up. Doesn't matter. And I found such an intrigue in that fact that they could connect with human beings so consistently in the same way. And I said, well, I want to connect with human beings in my own way. And for me, that was no longer wearing the product. I wasn't relating to the marketing. And all of a sudden, I started to realize that I had this superhuman power, which was human uniqueness. Every woman is a snowflake in some aspect. And the fact that we are creating products where women are pushing themselves into a product versus the product contouring to them didn't sit right with me. In addition, I didn't see women around me living their lives passionately, purposefully, and confidently. They were participating to some degree, but they weren't leading. And so I thought about how do you bring social media and the idea of everyone connecting around the world now so quickly and so consistently with the power of brand. And so I left, and then there's these beautiful things called non-competes. And so I took that time and I worked for a startup called Thrillist Media Group. Got my, retail MBA in startup life after that for 3 years and went on to start Lively.
Amazing. So what I love that you said just now is that you were really able to marry purpose and passion with profession. I think that's something that everybody aspires to, but also a lot of people struggle with. So it's wonderful to hear that you're doing it.
Thank you.
So you mentioned this a bit in your introduction, but could you go over some more of the gaps that you noticed within the space that Lively's in and some unmet consumer needs that you knew you wanted to address and fill and do differently with your own brand?
Yeah. I grew up around such powerful brands. I love using Ralph Lauren as an example. I used to put on a Ralph Lauren polo and feel something. It wasn't about the IP of the fabric or the make or whatever it was. It was the IP of that logo. And so that always stayed with me. And so as I saw startups coming to market, I always had passion around the lingerie category. It never sat well with me the fact that this category is for women. Women hate it. Like there is nothing worse traditionally than going to buy a bra. There's nothing worse than a woman chasing you with a tape measure, following you into a fitting room, touching you in all these weird places and telling you all these things about your body. And then I would think about categories like shoes and dresses. Well, I have way more dresses and shoes than I'm ever going to need, but I wear a bra every day. So why isn't that category celebrated by women? And so it started to think about the idea of, well, Victoria's Secret has 30 to 40% market share when I was there of $13 billion in the United States. If I could just address even 1% with my perspective, that's an opportunity. And what I thought was missing from the category were products that conform to human uniqueness. And so I looked around and everything that women would put on a Saturday morning was not a bra. It was a sports bra. It was swimwear. It was anything but a functional traditional bra. You'd wear a traditional bra to work and you would rip it off of your body the second you got home. And so I would look at my drawer and I would say 2 columns. The bras that I would wear every day, basic and boring, caught dead if anyone saw me in it, and the bras that I would wear for an occasion. And I felt the gap in the market was bringing those two things together.
I love that. And I think this is a great moment to touch a little bit more on product because I think it's very emblematic of what your brand and your broader retail strategy is about too. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the term athleisure or athleisure, but you use a different word when you talk about your product. And that word is Leisurée, which I love. So it's a portmanteau of leisure or leisure and lingerie. And I think that it really gets at the core of what Lively is about. So could you elaborate on Leisurée for us?
Sure. When I was building the company and the brand, it was me and 3 other women, and we would go into meetings with different people, and I would say, "Oh, I'm creating this community and this brand and this experience for women." And they were like, "Great, what product are you selling?" And as soon as I would say lingerie, everyone's eyes would shift. It's like lace, corsets, the supermodels. And I was like, but it's not lingerie. It's different. And so, 3 weeks in, I was looking at our designs and we were literally cutting off the waistbands of yoga pants and stapling them to swimwear and like being just such girls. We said everything traditional about bras put over here, everything that we're wearing over every day put here. And let's take function from this area and just morph it to the aesthetic of what we love. So one day I was on a run right after we launched, and I was like, I cannot go into another meeting and say the word lingerie and have to caveat all the reasons why we're different. And so I was running. I'm like, athleisure lingerie. I almost tripped and fell and heard Leisurée. I'm like, there you go. I wrote it on a gold Sharpie for my team on Monday morning, and they were like, what were you doing this weekend? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, just sit with it. And every day they would come in and they'd be like, kind of makes sense. I don't know. It's kind of cute. It's kind of funny. And then finally I was like, let's just go with it and see what happens.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think, so you have such a unique approach to your product. You also have a unique approach to your strategy in terms of how you reach certain markets and certain demographics. So DTC and digital first brands tend to do really well on the coasts and really meaning New York and California. Yeah. But you didn't want to go for those easy markets right off the bat. You went straight for middle America, actually, which can be difficult for startups. So could you tell us about that decision and also what that required of Lively?
Yeah. I think statistically, you find that D2C brands really thrive in New York and California, and they end up seeing, anywhere from 60 to 80% of their sales coming from those coasts, which is amazing the first 1 to 3 years. But then around 4 or 5, you're like, oh, I need to get the middle for growth. So strategically, we were saying, well, let's forget them. Let's go right for the middle. And how do we do that? Well, you have to create a brand that is truly accessible first and foremost. So you have to ensure that it's not just relatable to the women here in Manhattan, but if you go 90 miles in or jump over, to Wichita and Nashville, that it makes sense. So the first thing we did was we started to have focus groups. We would bring together women of different of different mindsets. So moms, fitness women, women in business, women on the younger side of coming out of college, women that are in, the later side of becoming, empty nesters and so forth. And we would show them our images and we would say, write down the first word that comes to your mind. On a Post-it, they would say, provocative, sexy, da-da-da. No, not that image. Empowered, confident. Yep, that image. What are the words that you like? Is it when I say, panties, underwear, undies, like what is the word that you feel most comfortable? Panties, no. Underwear, kind of boys. Undies, oh, that's really like playful and relatable. Great. So all of these women essentially created the brand with us. So then we said, okay, well now how do we get these women to now push out the brand? What we did was we started building our Instagram feed about 3 months before we sold our first product. And we would get direct messages from these women, and they would say, oh, I love this idea of Wild Hearts meets Boss Brains. How can I help? And we would say, actually, you could be a part of sharing our message when we launch. So we would ignore how many followers they had, and we would only look at their feeds. And we would say, do their feeds demonstrate that they're living lively? Do their feeds evoke what we're trying to inspire women to do, passion and purpose? And so we curated about 100 women from from Denver to the Dakotas to Nashville to Texas, and we armed them with content. We said, here's 4 different images to pick from. Here's a couple of different captions to tweak into your own language and your voice that's native to you. And on April 1st, let's go for it. And so we did. And we coupled that with an amazing email campaign as well, some press, and we shipped to every state in the country within 45 days of launching, no paid.
Wow. That's incredible. And so you've really taken your business across the country. What you've also taken across the country is your pop-up experiences. And I would say fairly early on in your development as a DTC and digital native brand, you made that transition to the physical world.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear about that. What was that like to make that leap? At what point did you decide to do that? And what has that benefit been to Lively?
Yeah. Having other people, having a community and having customers and women build your brand along the way is a gift that we just never wanted to take for granted. And so, we started with those first 100 women, and then we started to hear, love from women within the New York area. And I said, well, if we're actually going to be a community first, well, you can't just be digital. You have to be physical. So it started with super scrappy moments where 15 days after we launched, we said, we're going to have a happy hour in our office, which is on 38th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue. Not the most glamorous place. Great. Not glamorous, not Soho. Come hang out with us and tell us how you're living lively. And I was shocked. Like 40 women showed up. And we're like, let's take this to the next step level. We'd call up Soul Cycle and we're say, hey, we're pretty sure every woman that works in your office may like our brand. Can we host a happy hour? And they'd be like, amazing, yes. And we would get more impressions and more women. So we would just keep going on and on with these physical activations. And we had 2 rules. They could not be about lingerie, and it could not be about promoting the product itself. It had to be only about what do women like to do to come together. They love succulents. We'll have a succulent class. They love discovering new books. We'll have a book reading. They love supporting mental health awareness. We'll have a fundraiser. And so we would do this, and then it bridged into doing pop-ups, really scrappy in year 2, Nashville, Dallas, and so forth, and then moved into our first store this summer.
Yeah, wonderful. So I know you've had a series of successful pop-ups here in New York too, and that eventually translated into a permanent experience store, the Lively Experience Store, which just moved recently, but is here downtown in Soho. Yeah. It's an amazing place. You should all check it out. So could you tell us about that store and at what point you decided to go from pop-up to permanent?
Sure. Yeah, we would do these 2-week pop-ups. I was such a piker, such a scrappy, entrepreneur where I didn't want to spend a lot of money and tie it up into leases and so forth. And so what we would actually do is we'd go to landlords and ask for rev shares. Your space is empty. Let us come in for 2 to 3 weeks. We'll drive buzz, we'll drive traffic, and we'll help you get that full-time tenant. But after 2 weeks, it was like, we'd hear that song, Closing Time. We were so sad to leave. We had just made all of these friends in this town, and the ROI was there. We thought the ROI was going to be on the marketing impressions that we're pushing to digital. But we found in those 10 days, we not only paid off the cost of of being there to open it and the design work, we paid off our hotels and our meals too. And we would see 175% increase in transactions within customers online in the city of Dallas and 80% in the state of Texas. We'd say the same triple-digit growth in Nashville and double-digit growth in the state of Tennessee. So finally, we're like, all right, let's try taking this to the next level. And so we did, and we started to see, after 6 months, we're ROI positive. And so we're continuing on that path. But transparently, I'm still scrappy on the idea of a 3 or a 5 year. It sounds like 50 years if I hear that.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'd love to hear more about that store. Could you take us through the Lively experience? And for those who maybe haven't been or won't be able to go, what do you hope that that store can accomplish? What do you want consumers to experience when they
Yeah.
walk in?
I think there's three main goals of the Lively Experience store. The first thing is those 100 women that started with us in the beginning. We realized was a very special connection that we needed. It's essentially taking the old school mentality of what retail is, word of mouth. If you can get someone to vouch for your brand and your experience, say, "Oh my God, I went to this experience with this new brand called Lively and their product is amazing," and you say that to your sister, your mother, or your best friend, that is just going to keep going and going and going. And so we need to nurture those women. We took that 100 women to 1,000 ambassadors in the second year of business. And then we realized how much work it took to do that. We put some technology behind it. And now we have 65,000 brand ambassadors around the country. So the first objective of the Lively Experience Store is essentially a clubhouse, a place for them to come and be together and activate what is important to them. And so when you come into the store, you're going to say, well, where's all the product? Because a third of the store is actually dedicated to retail. Like, we don't think about dollars per square foot. We keep it very open. There's cafe areas, there's seating areas, there's LaCroix, there's food and different things coming in and out. So it's very much a place to relax and hang out. You'll see people eating lunch in swinging chairs or nursing their babies, while they're hanging out in Soho. We want them to feel comfortable and like it's a second home. The second major objective, of course, is to sell product and to help them find that perfect fit. Because sometimes buying online, like, you just don't get it right the first time. And then the third main objective is data. We want to understand what's next. So we usually have some type of experience where they can vote on our product. Anything that comes into the Lively development pipeline usually comes from a customer saying, "Oh, what about this? Have you ever thought about a strapless bra without a wire? Great idea." And so it's really like an incubation lab.
Wonderful. Yeah, Lively is so inspiring, not just as a brand and as a concept, but also as a narrative. And I'd love to wrap on this because I think it's a really powerful note and really touching. I love that Lively really encourages women to live lively, to be dynamic, to be the actors and creators of their own lives. And it's so empowering. And I think that's a narrative that we need because we are still the inheritors of these other narratives that are maybe not so empowering. I won't go into for the sake of this conversation, but we know what I mean. And I think that retail is particularly poised to be receptive to these narratives right now because retail is not just retail anymore. It's about enriching the consumer's life and giving them those ideas and those concepts. So I'm happy that Lively is putting that inspiring message out there into the greater dialogue.
Thanks,
well, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure.